New Orleans, the Crescent City, famous for its jazz, its food, and its Mardi Gras parades. But behind the sound of trumpets and the glow of Bourbon Street lights lies a much darker history. Long before the Mafia rose to dominate New York or Chicago, New Orleans was already home to America's first true Sicilian crime syndicate. It was here, in the French Quarter, where the Mafia first took root in the United States. And it was here where one man, Carlos Marcello, would eventually build an empire so powerful that it rivaled the five families themselves. Yet outside of Louisiana, his name is often forgotten. This is the story of the New Orleans Mafia. From its bloody beginnings to its hidden hand in politics, gambling, and even one of America's greatest tragedies. The story begins in the late 19th century, when waves of Sicilian immigrants poured into New Orleans. They brought with them their traditions, their families, and hidden in the shadows, the secret society known as the Mafia. It didn't take long for these immigrants to clash with the established order. In 1890, the city's police chief, David Hennessy, was gunned down in the streets. Dozens of Sicilian men were arrested, accused of being part of a mafia conspiracy. But when most of them were acquitted, an angry mob stormed the jail and lynched 11 of them in what remains one of the largest mass lynchings in American history. The Hennessy murder and its aftermath burned the Mafia's name into New Orleans' reputation, and it marked the beginning of a criminal underworld that would thrive for over a century. In those early years, the Mafia ran protection rackets, controlled the fruit and produce trade, and profited from the vices that define the city: gambling, prostitution, and smuggling. The French Quarter was their stronghold, and from there they extended their reach across the city. For decades, their power remained local, often hidden behind the culture of corruption that already defined Louisiana politics. But by the mid-20th century, the family found its greatest leader, a man who would transform them from a regional gang into one of the most influential crime families in America. His name was Carlos Marcello. Marcello was not a flashy gangster. He didn't dress like a movie mob boss or crave the spotlight like John Gotti. He was quiet, methodical, and calculating. Standing barely over 5 feet tall, Marcello didn't look like an underworld powerhouse. But in reality, he was one of the most cunning and dangerous mafia bosses of the 20th century. His empire stretched across Louisiana into Texas and even into Las Vegas. He built his power through gambling, narcotics, and a stranglehold on local politics. In Louisiana, nothing happened without his approval. Politicians, judges, and even governors were rumored to be on his payroll. What made Marcello so effective was his ability to blend in. While bosses in New York were constantly under surveillance, Marcello lived quietly on his estate outside New Orleans, running a produce business as a front. He rarely left his territory, and he understood the value of keeping a low profile. But despite his quiet demeanor, Marcello wasn't afraid of confrontation. When Robert F. Kennedy became Attorney General in the 1960s and launched a crusade against organized crime, Marcello became one of his top targets. In a dramatic move, Kennedy had Marcello arrested and deported to Guatemala, claiming he was not a U.S. citizen. But Marcello didn't stay gone for long. Within weeks, he had bribed his way back into the United States, slipping across the border and returning to New Orleans like he had never left. This clash with the Kennedys would become one of the defining episodes of Marcello's life, and it would also fuel decades of speculation. For years, conspiracy theories have swirled around Marcello, suggesting that he may have played a hidden role in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Some believe that Marcello, enraged by RFK's crusade against him, orchestrated the ultimate revenge by helping to plan the murder in Dallas in 1963. While no hard evidence has ever proven this, Marcello himself reportedly made chilling statements later in life, hinting at his involvement. Whether true or not, the very fact that his name continues to be linked to the assassination shows just how deeply the New Orleans boss had embedded himself in America's history. But even without conspiracy theories, Marcello's empire was vast. He controlled casinos and clubs throughout the French Quarter, had a stake in Las Vegas operations, and was heavily involved in drug trafficking routes through the Gulf of Mexico. His influence reached deep into unions, shipping docks, and the political machine that ran Louisiana. Unlike some mob bosses who ruled with open violence, Marcello preferred bribery, corruption, and quiet deals made in smoke-filled backrooms. Violence was always on the table, but it was a tool of last resort used only when absolutely necessary. The New Orleans Mafia thrived under Marcello's leadership for decades, but by the 1970s and 80s, the walls began to close in. Federal prosecutors targeted his empire with wiretaps, undercover operations, and RICO indictments. Slowly, piece by piece, Marcello's control began to erode. His health also began to decline, and by the time he died in 1993, the once mighty New Orleans Mafia was a shadow of its former self. Yet the legacy of the New Orleans Mafia is undeniable. They were the first true mafia family in America, predating the five families of New York. They shaped the criminal underworld of the South, and under Marcello, they reached into the highest levels of American politics. Their story is not as widely known as Chicago or New York, but in many ways, it is just as important, because it shows how the mafia wasn't just an urban problem confined to northern cities. It was a national network, reaching into every corner of the country, even the jazz-soaked streets of New Orleans. Today, the French Quarter is filled with tourists, music, and nightlife. Few people walking those cobblestone streets realize that they are treading on ground once soaked in the blood and secrets of America's first mafia family. The shadow of Carlos Marcello still lingers over the city, his name whispered in the same breath as legends like Lucky Luciano or Al Capone. His empire may be gone, but the story of the New Orleans Mafia remains a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous men are not the ones who shout the loudest, but the ones who operate in silence, pulling the strings of power from the shadows. The New Orleans Mafia was born in blood, thrived in corruption, and left behind a legacy of mystery, power, and fear. And while history may have buried their story beneath the jazz and the parades, the truth is still there, waiting to be uncovered. Because in New Orleans, the music never stops, but neither do the ghosts.